sitting here today with Dana Kinsey from Driftwood Ranch on Orcas Island, and we're talking about beef. And to be specific, we're talking about grass-fed beef. Well, why is grass-fed beef different than regular beef?
Mostly because they only eat grass. We don't have any hormones, any antibiotics, we don't use any grain or corn. It's about the most natural way a ruminant can eat.
And why is that better?
I think for a variety of reasons. Primarily that you know exactly what the animal's eating, and they're intended to eat grasses. They're not really intended to be eating corn. We have a ranch that was started in 1960, and even previous to that it was a dairy, so we know what's been on the land for over 100 years, and it's only been cattle. There's been no other kinds of chemicals or buildings or roads or vehicles or anything that could possibly influence the meat. Great.
And what sort of animals do you have? What breed of cattle do you raise?
We started out with Charolais, only Charolais. We actually imported a bull from France, and his name was Boxer. He was the 1968 champion, world champion Charolais, and he came, and then from there we continued to buy bulls and start a Charolais focused ranch. There was Snowball and Boxer and a couple other of these larger bulls, and then it was one of the first really kind of big Charolais operations, and this was started by Charlie Arndt, who was a Hollywood actor, a character actor, and he had gone to France and seen them and eaten Charolais, and so of course he wanted to bring that to Orcas Island where he made his home, and they showed them all over the country. It was really great, but now we have a little bit of those Charolais left, but upon Charlie's death, the ranch took a few turns, and now we've got some Angus and some Hereford, which makes a
great grass-fed beef animals.
Yeah, so we're trying to respond to the demand. Folks like steaks, and folks are not making as many roasts as they used to. So
that's unfortunate. We're not in England, so good beef roasts are rare in the States.
Yes.
I remember when I first came out here in the early 90s, driving by the Arndt Ranch on Orcas and seeing the herd of Charolais. And there's nothing like seeing an all-white herd of cattle when you're used to just seeing Angus. Or in our case over here, our biggest herd here is Jerseys and Angus and Highland. And so seeing those bright white cattle out there in the middle of a green pasture was always, you almost drive off the road paying attention to them.
Actually, I have a feeling as much as the flavor that may have been also the driving force to get Charolais.
I think so. It's very unique and
stunning
very distinct,
they were.
But they are known, the Charolais is known as one of the better flavored meats.
It's the largest breed too, which is another part of ranching that folks forget, is that they're always looking for the fastest gaining, biggest animal, supposedly the best profits, which of course has not necessarily turned out. True. Because you will also get probably the tougher sometimes. So,
but when you are
the combination with
when you're feeding on grass, you have to take into consideration the size and the weight gain and maximize growth during grazing periods. One of the things I recently read was in Argentina, which used to be exclusively grass-fed, they've now switched to feeding some grain, rather controversially, because they figure a little bit of grain, especially when a calf is young, and if it's born in the winter when the grass isn't ideal, they'd rather see the weight gain be consistent. And I don't know what breeds they're talking about, but up here we've tailored our breeding and grazing seasons a little bit differently, but they seem to think that consistent grazing, consistent periods of growth make more tender meat than up and down fluctuations in periods of growth and grazing. And the other interesting thing that they do, which would never be allowed out here, is slow cooling of meat. Here, it's you slaughter the animal, it's immediately chilled. And there, even on a 90-degree day, if you figure your cattle is at most 120 degrees when it dies, it cools down to 90 slowly. That's still cooling. But the USDA doesn't seem to think that.
Yeah, they have the refrigerated truck. Yeah, the cows have the ranch and the grass feeding has been really really consistent, and because our weather up here, even though we're way up north, we still get a fairly decent kind of growth pattern in grasses. It's mid-January right now, and you can see some growth starting. I was surprised when I walked up to see today in our own field to see the clover is still coming along. Yeah, and our calves are usually born in March and April, so by then we're in full force. Yeah, they take the best advantage of. And then it goes all the way into October. I mean, you still have some very good grass growth all the way through October and November. Yeah. Are you seeing a larger demand for grass-fed beef? Yes. Than in the past? Definitely. The notion, I've gone to quite a bit of the farmers markets to try to sell what we have, and I think out of all the people I've met, only 2 people have said a remark about, I only eat corn-fed, and I say, from Nebraska, huh? Yeah, so there's I believe one of the gentlemen said, yeah, I really like it when it puffs up when I cook it. And I thought, what? This isn't food you're eating. What are you eating? Yeah, so I didn't know that beef was supposed to puff up. So I grew up on this, and I actually became a vegetarian when I left home. When I left Orcas, because I tried to eat the meat that you get off, the stuff you get in the store, and it didn't taste like anything I'd had before, and I couldn't eat it. It just tasted horrible. Because ours actually has some flavor to it. Yeah. In this other stuff, it just, I don't know, it kind of scared me, actually. Now, how long do you allow your beeves to go before you slaughter? We're doing 2 years, but there is a couple folks who are experimenting with 2.5 and 3 years. Mm-hmm. And I think that probably is the better option with grass-fed. Yeah, I seem to think so. And with my own Highland cattle, I've had them at various ages, going down to 18 months, which on a Highland is almost too young. There's just not enough meat on the frame for that to take them then. But I've heard 3 years is really a good target. Yeah. And that's quite an investment, because you're grass feeding cattle, and the theory is, in the commercial industry anyway, if anything over 24 months, then you're going to have tough meat. That is the conventional theory, but with grass-fed, it takes so much longer to raise. Yeah. In a way, I mean, there are some breeds that will gain quicker. It's really interesting to see people not only now going from wanting to buy organic, or what we call all natural, because the organic hoops are still a little bit daunting for a smaller place. But the issues have finally kind of made it to the forefront, and it's taken a long time. When I went to college, I went to undergraduate at University of California at Davis, and I took a beef management course in animal science, and because I wanted to know why was it hard for us to get out of the red, our ranch. I thought, gosh, we have great cattle, we have great land, what's the problem? And the entire course was taught to do everything on a schedule with your beef cattle, to pump them with hormones, to pump them with steroids, to pump them with antibiotics, and to get them into the feedlot. And this fast weight gain, and we were actually taught that it was legal and accepted and done, and that we should be continuing to do it, to feed roadkill, to feed newspaper, to feed cement for the last 3 weeks of their life.
Bulk them up.
And I had a very difficult time in that course because I was like, no wonder we can't make it. We can't compete against cement-filled cattle. I don't know how. I mean, yes, our cattle are bigger breeds, but that doesn't make up for cement.
Well, the idea is to bulk them up.
And it was protein. The roadkill was free, cheap protein.
Crazy.
So wherever you can get free, cheap protein was the goal, rather than caring about what went into the animal, because that was actually what's going to come out of the animal was decent food. So that was in the early 90s was being taught. And you know, I just was sort of stunned, and I'm just really happy to see that there is something in the industry starting to self-correct and say, maybe these notions of protein and weight gain at any cost are starting to bite you, because the public is starting to say, wait a second, I'm eating something that ate what?
Yeah.
They're not questioning as much, but there's definitely a tide turner there.
A lot of that is to counter what's called shrinkage, because when you transport cattle, you load them into a big container truck and you ship them halfway across the universe to a slaughterhouse. Stress and transportation time and just factors of not eating and not being fed during that time all amount to up to something like 3 or 4% weight loss, up to the point when they're slaughtered. And so these guys practice this so that their cattle stay heavy, are bulked up, and stay heavy, so they increase the profit and they don't lose the money through that shrinkage. But now you do something different. You don't ship your cattle off the farm or take them out of the islands and put them to a slaughterhouse. You have the slaughterhouse come to you. Yeah,
we actually lucked out. A few forward-thinking folks in the county, San Juan County, decided to get together it's called the Island Grown Farmers Cooperative, and put together enough support and basically capital to build a mobile slaughter unit. They call it the mobile processing unit, and this thing can handle basically one animal at a time. They do sheep, and they do cattle and pigs, right?
Pigs. I'm pretty sure we're thinking of having them come out next fall.
I've seen them do both the cattle and the sheep, and they come to the ranch and will slaughter about 5 a day. Is all that, because they have one gentleman who's in there who does all the work, and then they have one USDA inspector on site the entire time who makes sure that all the protocol is followed. And it's fascinating because when I try to sell this beef, because we're sort of small and we're in the middle of this little island, people say, oh yeah, right, like you have a USDA inspector. And I'm like, well, actually we do.
Yeah.
And it's really fantastic. In fact, the county that Santa Fe is in New Mexico, is trying to also get this similar unit.
I think a lot of places are trying to copy this ideal.
Because it allows the rural small-scale farmer to stay competitive, because that energy it takes to load up the cows, put them in a trailer, get them on a ferry, take them off island, spend your whole entire day, all this.
It's a lot of hassle.
You know, and you don't even know what's going on. I mean.
Yeah, well, and the other point is, and something I learned doing our own pigs here, and I knew this from before, is when the animals are slaughtered on the farm, there's a lot less stress. And when animals are stressed going into slaughterhouse or at any point along the chain, the minutes before they die, that the release of hormones, the adrenaline, all that
lactic acid,
it taints the meat. And as you know, most of the end goal is a quality meat product. And I think a lot of what people associate, especially with grass-fed beef, there's a lot of criticism. It's tough. Some of that is not so much how the animal was raised, although there's certain nutrients and growing practices on grass that are necessary to get tender meat. But I think a lot of it boils down to slaughter and aging. If the animal's stressed from transportation at slaughter time, it's going to be tense. It's going to have those hormones. And then if it's improperly aged, if it's vacuum packed right away like they do for supermarkets, and a lot of that quick processing that's still a holdover from the commercial industry, if we try and copy that and model it with a small-scale grass-fed operation, the meat's going to end up tougher. Now, I know that the mobile processing unit, they take the meat once it's slaughtered on the farm, it's hanging, They bring it back to butcher shop.
Yeah, in
sort of
Bow,
setup.
Washington.
Yeah. And then I think they'll hang the beef for 14 days.
Yeah, it's 2 weeks to 3 weeks. You can
they'll allow you to hang it
request
21.
longer.
Well, that's good, because the longer you hang it, the more tender it's going to be.
And then they allow, they still do the butcher wrap, and then they also do the vacuum
Yeah,
wrap.
we've got a lovely selection of meat you brought today. It's all frozen because it was for sale. And we've got some oxtail, and we're going to be cooking with some of this later on. We've got a piece of liver and some skirt steak, a flank steak, which is I thawed out so we could cook with it. And they're, typical butcher, no vacuum pack, no polyethylene tray here. This is a nice skirt steak. And then we have one other piece of meat that you're trying to fish out. And this here, we saw this and we couldn't figure out what it was really. It's called a mock tender roast. And I think the reason they call this a mock tender roast is be heavy emphasis on the mock. Different butcher operations, even different supermarkets, different slaughter facilities call beef by different cuts. And this is a chance to try and capitalize on a rather underutilized cut of meat. But really it comes from one of the toughest portions of any animal, up in the shoulder. And so even though it says mock tender roast, sometimes they're called mock fillets or fillet roast. Any of those names, it means that it has to be braised no matter what. In fact, braising might not even make it tender.
Yeah, there's a lot of the cow that can be turned into hamburger. And the hamburger is actually fantastic.
Yeah, well,
that's another real misunderstanding with just cows in general, whether grass-fed or not, is the kinds of cuts you can get. They're not all steaks.
Yeah, a lot of people.
They tend to have actually a great deal of percentage that is not steak. And
because people don't roast well, it's supposed people grill, but they want steaks to grill. They don't do stews, they don't do roasts or the slower cook method, so that probably almost all gets ground in a hamburger these days.
Yeah, and that is the other nice part about sort of this more small scale, is that you can choose the kinds of cuts you want. You can get a standard cut, or you can pick and choose.
Well, yeah, this is different because the customer gets to choose what they want.
We can do full porter house steaks, like the real ones that you can't get in the store any longer because of the issues with mad cow disease.
Right.
We can actually leave the T on the T-bone, the top part.
That bit of spine, which they have to take out.
Because we know that these cattle, there's no E. coli, there's no mad cow, there's nothing of that sort, and so it's pretty fantastic to be able to do that. But people, I'm not sure they're really there yet as far as understanding how safe.
Yeah, well, hopefully this and other efforts will educate people about that. What's your favorite cut? Not hamburger now. Don't say hamburger.
No, actually, I do like. We have a cross-cut shank. It's a lot like
shank is great.
Oh, yeah. It's a lot like an oxtail, only it's got more meat.
And shank typically, because in the industry now, it's taken over by chefs and everybody else. It's got an really intense flavor, but it's one of those bits that need to be slower cooked, and it's the only way to make a really good beef consommé, or those rich, deep flavored dishes. But it's also phenomenal slow cooked and braised.
I just make soups with it,
and it's great served over pasta. Just cook it meltingly slow, and
of course, our New York steaks are probably the most popular.
I can imagine
for a cut, and they are quite good.
American cookbooks these days are really short on the ground about what to do with different cuts.
I think my favorite is I used to do this for people to introduce them, was the flank steak. And I think one of the cookbooks had you stuff the garlic in there.
Okay.
Before you cut. Oh, it was.
Now flank comes from the belly, just the hind, just before the hind leg, and it's a rather tough cut of meat. It can be rather tough. It's made of long, stringy strands of muscles, which I think it's the only piece of meat or muscle in the entire animal that's made up of single strands of beef fiber that go in one direction only. And so you have to cook it specially, you have to slice it thinly. It's great, got really amazing flavor, but because of that muscling, it requires a lot of care in cooking. Otherwise, it can
That's why we come to
shrink up
you.
and yeah, thanks. It'll shrink up and turn into tough rubber. But we'll be cooking with this piece of skirt later, flank. It can be stuffed, it can be stir-fried. I mean, really, yeah, there's a lot of things you can do with a flank that it makes it really one of the most versatile cuts in the whole animal, because it's got that combination of great flavor that even tenderloin or some of the more tender cuts don't have, but it's also got that ability to quick cook, which is really one of the keys people don't quite get, I think, and they still don't understand about grass-fed beef. Grass-fed beef doesn't have all the fat that corn-fed does. It has marbling, it has depth of character and some fats, but you know, all that flavor there.
It's not all through the meat,
but
like
it's
you'll see
not
with that
constantly through, which
corn.
is one of the better health benefits of grass-fed beef. It doesn't have that corn-fed beef. It has the marbling, it has that character that everyone supposedly seeks after, but it also is high in fats.
That's a USDA. They've you know, because they grade beef and they want this. It's a marbling grade.
Yeah, right.
It's not a grade about the quality of meat. It's really interesting. You know, when I took that course, we were supposed to be able to grade cattle on the hoof based on how much top fat they have. When they run, you know, if the fat jiggles, that's too much fat. But there's got to be enough that they don't look skinny. And then you're supposed to be able to say, well, then their meat probably has this much fat running all through it.
Right.
And it's kind of disgusting, really. But when I used to, before I, well, when I bought the store-bought meat before, when I had to leave home, I remember being stunned at how much grease was left in the pan.
Yeah.
If you made a hamburger, just a ground beef, you know. Our ground beef, you make a hamburger, there's really no fat.
Yeah, and even if you add fat to the beef, when you grind it to get a good 30% nice mix, the beef itself absorbs it and it doesn't pool out in a pan.
You know, you don't have to pour it out. It doesn't leave this big residue.
With grass-fed beef, it's not so much an issue of whether there's a lot of fat or not. It's that the fat is higher quality. It has more vitamin E. It has more conjugated linoleic acid, I think is what it is, CLA, which is proven to fight cancer. It actually reduces cancer levels. And that's only found in grass-fed animals and grass-fed meats, anyway, in the meat category, because grain has the opposite effect. It's, the fats in grain-fed animals is very dense in all the wrong things. It doesn't have the omega-3s. It doesn't have any of the really healthy properties that a comparable piece of grass-fed beef has in terms of, you know, health benefits and lower fat, lower cholesterol. And so grass-fed, especially people who are heart patients or on diets, is really an awesome choice.
It's a big, and then the issue of, I've seen a lot of articles about your carbon footprint, and you're not supposed to eat meat.
I know, I saw a really disgusting thing about dairy cattle the other day, where they were claiming that organic methane is so wasteful and it doubles the carbon footprint, and I'm thinking this is just wrong, because if anything, it's got less intense.
Yeah, there's a very
production.
strange thing, and it's obviously geared towards the factories. And they're claiming, you know, cows put off half the methane gases in the world, which is just ridiculous.
Well, there's a study in Britain or the Netherlands, I think, recently proved that the methane and carbon emitted from cattle, especially dairy cattle, comes from grains, and that grass-fed cattle do not produce the same levels or quantities. So if we were to switch to an all grass-fed dairy cattle and beef cattle industry in the world, or at least, you know, significant portions, the cow burping syndrome would go away. Just quickly, what are your views on cloned animals? As the FDA has just said that they can find no difference
Right.
in cloned animals or uncloned, and no significant health factors to stop the use of cloned meats or meat from cloned animals in the food chain.
I instantly just think of the genetics, and I guess maybe, yeah, if you look at the first generation of cloning, perhaps there's little change, but we all know that as you go down the line, biologically, you start to get deformities, and you mostly lose genetic variability, which is what allows animals, people, species to adapt to changing world. And if you simplify the genetic code, which is what a cloning situation is going to do, it's not only going to simplify it, it's going to singularly, I mean, we've learned from cheetah, you know, that you start to limit that genetic code and you start to lose the animals in general. And I mean, just in wildlife biology, wildlife conservation courses I've taken, they said, you know, there's a minimum number, and they can't really peg it, but they have. We were able to get them to say, if you get a population below 1,200 individuals, you are going to have genetic bottleneck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is what the buffalo have gone through, which has made them almost. You know, we're trying to hang on to the last
There's
of the
something
species.
like 70% regular beef cattle now.
Texas A&M finished a study in the mid-90s. They pulled tails, they pulled the DNA off the tail of herds. I believe it was, I forget how many herds they chose, but all over the country. Every single herd had been crossed with cattle at some point. Yeah. Some of them as many 17 times crossed with cattle. Only the ones in Yellowstone, those buffalo, hadn't been crossed with cattle. So genetics have proven that we don't know what we're doing.
Well, first of all, my concern is, how are they sure that the animals they're cloning are perfect?
Exactly.
There's no way of
perfect?
starting. And what is perfect? There's no way of giving a guaranteed success outcome. And then the other factor is, you know, cloned foods, cloned animals going into production as food. There have been no studies on same thing with genetic modified food. There are no studies out there, no long-term studies to say what the
we don't have 20 years to say, oh, this is what happens.
Yeah, there's no proven outcome, and so it's just.
I actually found it fascinating that they would put their necks out like that, because, I mean, with mad cow, they've kind of that whole situation was frightening. I was told by some folks out of WSU that there was this mad cow found here in Washington State not too long ago, but that it had actually been found 6 months prior, but they didn't announce it until the day after Christmas or whatnot.
The market just crashed.
They didn't announce it until that herd could be disposed of, sold off, so that farmer wouldn't go out of business.
Well, it could.
And then they said, "Oh, by the way, we just found mad cow," but it had been 6 months prior.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of safety issues that nobody wants the bad stuff to happen on their watch, and so.
Now, do you know about RCAF, the Organization for Small Farmers and Ranchers?
Oh yes,
yes, because they're fighting the 30-month rule. There's the federal government now has said that cattle over 30 months, and arbitrarily 30 months is the time frame when under 30 months cattle pretty guaranteed not to have BSE. Over 30 months they can. But it's all arbitrary.
Arbitrary, made-up stuff. They don't even know what causes BSE.
Exactly, but what they've done now is they've said cattle from over 30 months old can be imported from Canada now, freely. And the problem with that is Canada is rife with herds that have BSE. Proven. And they're still discovering them every single day. But USDA, which is supposed to be, was founded back in the 1800s to be the savior and the bastion of the small farmer, has now become the whipping boy of big industry, and international trade.
A lot of it's the trade.
And it's all trade. So now these cattle are flooding across the borders with BSE, no way of detecting, and it's just become an issue where many people I speak to, and ourselves included, I know you, won't buy supermarket beef anymore. And now that's not only hurting the American beef industry,
Right.
but it also causes issues with trade.
Right.
Because if people know, and as they should know, that the beef on supermarket shelves has an unknown
Origin.
possibility, unknown origin and unknown possibility of having BSE, then it's just problematic.
Yeah. No, it's truly frightening.
All right, well, we better wrap this up. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
coming and talking to us and bringing some beef. We're going to get in the kitchen a little later and cook some up and come up with a recipe for
Grass-fed.
grass-fed beef. Orcas Island Driftwood Ranch grass-fed flank steak. Great. Thanks a lot, Dan.
Thank you.
Bye.